At this time, I would like to have, well, first of all, our next speaker was not originally scheduled to speak at this conference. And we had someone that could not make it. And so we appreciate our Ohio friend that is about to take the stage, that she was willing and able to be here today, along with her friend. Would you stand, Jacob? Stand. And then also, Keith, where is yours? So we have a couple author illustrators that have brought friends with them this weekend, and we appreciate you being here in support of your significant other. So we thank you for that. So if Macy Maligan would come forward and introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Macy Maligan, and I'm a senior here at the University of Findlay. I am in the education program, and I'll be finishing in the spring with a degree in primary education. You all today, fellow lovers of learning, know the impact a good book can have on such an individual. Today, Kate Hoefler, the author speaking next, has a very influential words within her books as she hopes to give readers an enlarged sense of the world. I found a lot of social-emotional learning benefits when reading her books, and I hope to use those in my future classroom someday. It's an honor to have gotten to know her and introduce her today. Please join me in welcoming Kate Hoefler.
It's always a microphone thing at my height. Is this the lowest it's ever been? Okay. So, hello, I'm Kate Hoefler. Thank you, Macy. That was a really sweet introduction. My first time coming to Mazza was actually, I want to say it was 8 or 9 years ago, but I feel like we've all lost track of time with the pandemic. But I was here for a library conference, so I wasn't here in an author capacity. And it was around the time when my first book, Real Cowboys, was coming out. And I remember the illustrator for Real Cowboys, Jonathan Bean, had been here and had done a talk. And then my library came through here. And Ben had given a fantastic talk, and then I went through the gift shop, and I bought a bunch of books, and Ben rang me out, and I said nothing to him about Real Cowboys or anything. And when I got home, I told Jonathan Bean about it. And understandably, he said, well, why didn't you say anything? And the only thing I could think to say was I didn't know how to do it without being weird. So here I am, 7 or 8 years later, about to be weird in front of a lot more people. But I think now I recognize that weird feeling comes from what I recognize now is overpowering humility. I think I saw back then and now just that I was standing in the largest collection of original children's book illustration art in the world. And so to stand among the art and within this industry and along these keynote speakers and hardcore picture book fans, it's incredibly humbling, which makes me weird, apparently, when I come up here. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with my books, this is the buffet so far, just to provide a context for some of the slides you'll see. And you'll see a lot of spreads from my books as I'm doing this presentation because I am a writer and I don't illustrate my books. We won't go into jealousy, but I'm jealous of, and I'm going to try not to sound bitter up here about that, but a special thing about doing a talk like this is that it encourages bookmakers to think about why we do the things that we do, and to kind of summarize my heart in it. I guess the core of the apple. For me, it's challenging to talk about that core because there's this beautiful mystery to creating that I haven't quite figured it out. And I love that I haven't figured it out. I think there's joy and wonder in being a permanent student of something. So looking at my books so far, my Apple core question, at least for this talk, was what is gripping my chest, either when I'm writing something that feels right to me, or when I'm experiencing picture books from others that resonate with me. You know, like, what is it about picture books that make them sit in my rib cage? And that really is what it feels like to me. And I love that mystery. I never feel like I can clearly explain it, but I love trying to come as close as I can when I give a talk. And this talk is good timing because I came close to seeing something more about the mystery recently. At least I think I caught a little glimmer, maybe a spark of what it could be for me. I love starting a slide like this. So there's this documentary. But I love documentaries, and I just watched this one. For those of you who like documentaries about art and creating and connection, you might like this one. But it's called In Search of the Great Song. And you can see on the cover, it's 50 voices, 12 countries, and one question. And the one question that they asked was, what is the great song to you? And in it, they posed that question to painters, composers, poets, anthropologists. I'm going to have to go through this list because I want you guys to know how widespread. Indigenous elders, music healers, editors, a biotech executive, professors, sociologists, therapists, and monks. And in it, they're talking about music, they're talking about song, and about this feeling that there is one great song. And by that, they mean a universal song lingering behind all songs that all living things sing in their words, in their deepest hearts. A song that unites us all. It's what's beneath all music, no matter the year, the time, the culture, and it's the same song. And it's fascinating to think about. It's a really good documentary. But one person in the film defined the great song like this. It is music that contains everything, sadness and being happy. It's pure emotion, so that when other people sing it, they can tell a story about themselves. That definition. What struck me was that definition for this immense, ancient, global, great song could also be the definition of what a picture book is and what a picture book does. Maybe what's so compelling about picture books, and maybe why I truly think the genre as an art form will last forever, is that picture books fundamentally and deeply participate in what people from all over the world are calling the great song. Picture books are also doing this singing where one hopes a reader can connect to it and see themselves in it, so to speak. So the spark in trying to articulate why it grips me, why I think that this genre grips so many, was kind of seeing this overlap to the great song. And so many bookmakers that I know and meet carry that great song definition of picture books in them. I mean, I think each bookmaker approaches the question and how they're going to do that differently. But the song is there, and the work that we do, it's rehearsing what I'll call a great song condition of being alive. If I looked at mine so far, and I'm thinking about mine, the great song or the condition of being alive, whatever that pulse is beneath them, at least for these, and maybe for the purposes of today, because I think everybody who creates, it changes all the time. And this is only one angle, but it fascinates me. And it fascinates me in terms of the kind of stories that I find myself drawn to writing. And it's this phrase, alone but together. I think it's a beautiful paradox about living that I think picture books help kids explore in a way that I hope feels like a hug. And that paradox of living is that we humans, no matter what age we are, ultimately have to sit with and sort through the feelings in our chest on our own. And what I mean by on our own has nothing to do with the help we get or adults in our lives or other friends, family. What I mean by on our own is that our consciousness is entirely our own. No one can get in our brains or hearts with us. That's kind of what I mean by on our own. But, and this is the saving paradox, that everything that is in our chests that we're sorting through on our own is in the chests of others. So we aren't alone, ever. That very condition of being alive alone in our chests is what connects us to everyone else who is alive at any age. And that's beautiful news, it makes us very deeply together, should we choose to see it. Because it's beautiful news, and I think we need those reminders, and I think picture books are that reminder. That's kind of part of their great song. So, as I said, I'm not an illustrator, so the best I can do to represent my road to picture books is a flow chart, and I found a free template online. I couldn't handle more than 3 boxes either, so we're just going to talk about 3 steps. And it kind of goes picture books to poetry to picture books. And really, maybe it should be a circle or a roundabout, but it's fascinating to me hearing about how everybody's had a different journey to picture books. Because there really is more than one way up a mountain, I suppose, right? But picture books were my beginning. It was the first form of art that I remember that kind of seized me. They were sitting in my ribcage even then. And so it happened early. I was one of 4 kids, and I'm an introvert. So books were a way I could be alone in a manner that was socially acceptable. I could go behind a chair and into my head and fly. And that was important because I also had an older brother who used to handcuff me to the dining room table. He's a professor now, and he's kind, and he even has health insurance for his dog, so like he's okay now, but this is my revenge. Any opportunity, I'm like, I got handcuffed to a table when he was supposed to be babysitting me. There were times he would lower the lights and play Michael Jackson's Thriller as well. And so I'm fine up here, I'm fine. So anyway, books, yeah, I could go behind a chair though, and those books felt like a hug, and I felt carried by them. They felt both like home and beyond home. And I think in terms of being an introvert, when you look back or you think back to the 1980s, we didn't really have that language, extrovert, introvert. We didn't talk about that. I don't remember that word being introduced, so books were just my way to meet my introvert needs, I suppose. And I think that without that language or without those discussions, it was very easy for introverts to become lonely because you needed to be alone, but you didn't want to be lonely. And for me, books bridged that gap. So it kind of went back to alone but together. I was deeply connected to the characters in the books I was reading. And I find this interesting to mention. So there I am, that's me in the 1st grade with one of the first books I remember writing, and it was called Wilma and the Bad, Bad Day. I remember the illustrations. The whale she's a whale, and she had just giant eyelashes. But I find it interesting, given the title of this talk, that book in 1st grade, which I still have, was a book about a whale who was having a bad day because she thought she was all alone in the world or in the sea. Spoiler, she finds out she's not. There's like a squid or something. I can't remember which sea creature. That brings us down to the second. By the way, I was going to do something cool, where you like highlight the second. I was like, I can't. So anyway, poetry. I really wrote off and on my whole childhood and adolescence, and then I did my undergrad and graduate work in creative writing, poetry for adults. And my sweet parents, they just supported me the entire time, and I can't tell you how many of their friends said, what is she going to do with that? And then suddenly I was going to get an MFA. Well, what does she plan to do with that? They just said whatever she wants, so they always supported me with that. These up here were some of the main poets that I worked with, and I've never actually put them together like this on one slide, and so it's kind of a special moment for me. It's like they're all in the same room together. And while I was studying poetry with them, looking back now, I realized that I was building up some of the muscles that I would use to write picture books. But I didn't know it at the time. Each of these poets actually taught me something I would use. It was kind of the classic Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. But maybe it's not that much of a leap. I think if you could use tracing paper and trace the shape of a poem and trace a picture book, if somehow that could be a shape, I think that there would be a huge overlap. It would be a very similar shape. Maybe because poetry does the great song too. But, both in a poem and in a picture book, you don't have much time to do what you're going to do. Maybe just seconds to get at the heart of something. So each word has to carry so much muscle and so much on its back. I don't think I have to prove to any of you that poetry and picture books hugely overlap on a Venn diagram, but in case any of you need convincing, here's a one-slide detour where I did not use a Venn diagram because I couldn't figure out how to. So 2 excerpts from poems. These lines are out of context, so these poor poets, because I know this isn't how they're supposed to be read, but I'm celebrating the lines, so I think they're okay with it. But they showcase the overlap between poetry, my background, and picture books. I think they're clear, beautiful overlaps that could also serve as other definitions of picture books. So the first, these lines from Dunya Mikkel, from her poem Tablets 5. We have only 1 minute, and I love you. That's what a picture book does. And then the final lines to Peter Gizzi's Some Joy for Morning. How was I to know I am not alone? Wild light. If 2 lines from a poem could capture what I want a picture book to do, it's that. So there's this vascular connection between picture books and poetry. And I mainly mention this because the best teacher to learn picture books, I think it's through other picture books. But being a permanent student of something means you can see teachers in everything. And you can apply past experiences to the kind of art that you're trying to do now. It's all part of your journey. And it's just if you're willing to find the connections. So after my MFA, I feel like there was a time of feeling lost. I hear that's common. Like everybody who's got an MFA, like, oh yeah, the lost years. So anyway, there were some floundering years after that. And I had lost some creative momentum. But after the birth of my first child, I was reading a ton of picture books again, both new books and my own childhood books. I had kind of gotten away from writing much poetry for adults or fiction, so I was feeling a little, creatively lost, I guess you could say. And I had some garden variety postpartum depression. And to make a long story short, picture books saved me. They carried me again the way they did when I was that tiny kid behind a chair. I felt connected to the world again because picture books love the world. And I now have language for this. Picture books participate in the great song. They bring us back to who we are and who we could be. And that brings us to Richard Peck. How's that for a transition? I couldn't think of anything better. Here's Richard Peck. Many, many years ago, I watched a taped interview with Richard Peck that I can't find now. So I can't even tell you the who, what, when, where. You guys are just going to have to trust me. So I can't even quote him. But what he said has sat in me ever since about storytelling and what he found crucial for his protagonists and other protagonists. He said he would position them as far away from their peer groups as possible, that was where the good emotional stuff was. And it's fascinating, isn't it? We see almost all writers do this, these beautifully solo protagonists, so that a book safely pilots for a young reader what it looks like to sort through one's own inner weather. without a peer or without an adult telling a young person how to feel about something or how to solve it. That's, I think, what makes books feel emotionally authentic. And I'd even argue intimate. We feel close with a character because we were alone with them, and perhaps they mirrored something that we feel too. So Real Cowboys, my first book, was written after I'd listened to a story, maybe on NPR, about the devastation of stampedes and how easily a herd could be spooked by a bird, by rain, and about how everything cowhands did, the ones who went across the West, everything they did was done to not spook the herd, to keep cattle calm, singing to them at night, not making sudden moves or shooting guns. It's kind of the opposite of the Hollywood cowboy. And while there isn't one main character in it, the character is an isolated group, if you will. The ones who went across the West, sometimes for months without seeing people, and all of the accompanying, again, we'll call it inner weather. Inner resources such as creativity and empathy and wonder and daydreaming that children can see in themselves and know that these, quote, separate, isolated, larger-than-life icons have the same inner weather that they do, even while children are just sitting in the back of a car or standing in a playground, sometimes separate, alone, but not alone. My second book, Great Big Things, is about a mouse, a solitary mouse, traveling through what we think of as objectively great big things. So canyons, deserts, highways, trains, bears, storms, the ocean, whales, cliffs, all to bring a single crumb to another mouse. And I suppose there's a little mystery in this book because it isn't until the end that a reader knows why the mouse was going on such a long and hard journey. And it was to give away that crumb. The act of love, which has the ability to make huge obstacles feel tiny and make the tiniest things seem enormous. When the mouse who receives the crumb brings up all the enormous things, physical obstacles in between them that the other mouse would have had to travel through, the giver who has journeyed simply says about all of that, small things. It's my hope that children would be able to see that what ends up being the great big thing here is something they can do, to love and to give. The small things were navigating a canyon and climbing a mountain and crossing an ocean. Some of the journeys we do for love and out of a desire to be together are ironically solitary and strangely happen alone. Or perhaps they too, a child loves someone who is far away. Perhaps that is the alone but together, that kind of love. And then just on another note, I think a child will always identify with a mouse, being small themselves and moving in a world where so many things have more power. My last 3 books, I'm noticing, all are preoccupied with what it means to warm up to the unknown or to the other or to the thing we're afraid of. Because I find and believe that it's absolutely crucial to everyone living at all ages. It immediately connects us all. It is what we all will have to do and what we all do often on a daily basis. And it's something we all navigate on our own because of our unknowns, our fears are also individual. And that has the potential to make us feel isolated rather than together. So I love creating bridges that connect us to each other because of those feelings, and maybe mirror that inner weather children and adults feel when dealing with discomfort and fear. There's a spread from Rabbit and the Motorbike, and in this story, Rabbit wants to leave his field, but is afraid. He lives through the stories of his adventurous old friend Dog, who in his youth would go across the country on his motorbike. And one day, Dog dies and leaves his motorbike to Rabbit, who hasn't been anywhere. And Rabbit, like maybe Richard Peck would approve of, is on his own a bit to sort through what he's going to do with the motorbike and his own dreams and fears. dreams and fears that he sorts out at his own slow pace, but a pace that is right for him. And eventually into a way of living that actually makes him feel dog right there with him. You know, in many ways, this spread could have been the title page of this talk. What Sarah Jacoby did with the spirit of dog riding with rabbit, alone but deeply together. There it is, you know. In my hopes beyond hopes, that's the togetherness I'm talking about between readers and a book. This spread of sorting through feelings and hopes that Rabbit's doing, both on his own and not alone, the spread of rabbit and the spirit of dog. Then Rabbit has stories to share with new friends. He can be someone's dog, so to speak, and has a way to keep old friends, such as dog and new, right there with him. And that's what stories and picture books do, I think. We are bonded to each other through them. We bear witness to each other. And as in the great song, we see ourselves. Nothing in common. Sorry, I keep looking at I want to make sure we get to lunch on time. So my stomach's starting to growl, and I'm like, is the mic picking that up? I hope not. I was going to blame some of you, like, you guys sound hungry. And just Nothing in Common features two loners who presumably have nothing in common, except for one thing. They both notice an old man and his dog every day, a dog who does marvelous things, such as bringing the man balloons. And both kids notice the day the dog goes missing. They end up taking parallel, identical searches for the dog throughout the city, and while that, quote, sameness gets featured and keeps building, these things they have in common, there's the repetitive line, but other than that, they had nothing in common. And they ultimately walk the dog home in the hot air balloon it happened to be in. They were the only two who knew that it liked balloons. And you can see at the end, the two who never waved because they had nothing in common now wave. In this book, that phrase, nothing in common, was one I'd heard a lot. And I'd even used it a lot. I think we all do. But I began to see how dismissive it is, how it's a way of saying, I'm not going to be curious or open about another human being. People use it as a reason to not connect. And while we use it casually, the danger is in actually believing it. That is self-isolating and can lead to incredible loneliness, that belief. So it's a book that isolates its characters by that belief and then renders that phrase every time it's repeated after a list of the same things they did or felt useless, or at least without meaning or power anymore. And when it no longer has power, they are together, not alone. There's a line in it, how they both had the same feeling inside, a deep feeling that ballooned out. My newest, Courage Hats, has two characters on their own. I'm telling you, I really don't set out. I'm going to isolate these people, but it does happen each time. Two characters on their own, a girl afraid of bears and a bear afraid of people who unknowingly share a train ride together. And it's about kind of warming up to the unknown, something they have to do in their own way. And the way that they do it is by constructing hats and being near the thing that scares them. The girl constructs a hat so that bears will think she's just another bear, and then the bear constructs a hat so that people will think he's just another person. And then, she thinks she's sitting next to a big grown-up, and he thinks he's sitting next to a cub. And I won't tell you too much that goes on with that, but there's a train ride. I'm going to set it up like an Agatha Christie. I got him on the train. But it's what naturally happens when we warm up to any situation. So this was one of the poets that I flashed up earlier. She was a poet I worked with multiple times at the University of Michigan, Thilace Moss. And by the way, she's not blinking. Her eyes are closed for her Poetry Foundation pick. And I love it because she loved to sincerely engage the world and be authentic and just soak up joy and all the feels. And so I just really think it captures who she is. But I want to tell you about a mystery that drives me and drives the way that I create, because it relates to Thylias Moss. And she was one of my mentors. So, okay, I get my MFA in poetry and writing poetry for adults, and I'm meeting with her. And it was the last meeting in her office before I walk out and leave the university forever and never see her again. So these are when the big stories happen, right? Thylias was and still is a very soft-spoken woman. Now, she can project when she's reading her poetry, but when she's not reading her poetry, very soft-spoken like that, and you're leaning forward, which is where this mystery comes from. So she had given me lovely advice that I now realize helped me find my home in picture books. She told me I hid interesting lines, sandwiching them between other lines, and really what I needed, she felt, was white space around them. They needed oxygen. You don't let them breathe, she said, as if perhaps I was afraid to let them stand on their own, 2 feet on stage, alone. And I loved it. And it's interesting because I love space now in picture books, spreads with just a line. And so I'm doing that work for her that she wanted to see. But the mystery was what she said after I was leaving my back to her. And in her very soft voice, I heard the words, "Do good work." And what wasn't clear to me was she was either saying, you do good work, like you're there, or the implication that I needed to do good work, that I should run harder, faster, be more. It's the not knowing, even 20 years later, that's the space I stay in as a creator. Is it enough? Can I do more? I stand between them, not solely believing in one or the other. Maybe it's that permanent student. And I'm alone in that mystery, but it's a mystery that all creators sit with, I've noticed. On the one hand, I have to believe that as a human being, I am enough. I am enough. But in order to grow as a creator, I have to ask, am I doing enough? Can I do more? Picture books say both, you are enough, you are loved, while simultaneously saying, we can do more and we can be more, we can love better, we can notice better, we can have more empathy. But that uncertainty was what my go forth was when I finished my MFA. And I think it carries with it solitary weather. And maybe it's the kind of weather you have in your chests as educators. You probably all have it, actually, probably all, that negotiation between I am already enough and what more can I do or be while I'm here. So on the one hand, I'm alone in this mentor mystery, but this is a mystery that's also one I think every single person in this room carries with them. So we're together in that. Other connections I love feeling with readers, I think, it's that creators of picture books are particularly good matches for creating for children because of the demands of the profession. Writing is incredibly lonely and solitary, and there's so much unknown. This is a picture of me writing. I was at a writing fellowship in Georgia where I wrote Courage Hats. And let me tell you, I didn't know if I deserved it. I was worried I would disappoint. Jason Reynolds was my neighbor, and I thought there had to be a mistake. So I wrote Courage Hats while needing courage myself. And by the way, I don't have to say, Jason Reynolds is like the greatest, nicest, yeah. But creators were alone, and there's fear, there's self-doubt, there's rejection, there's also getting up again and again after rejection, and quite often years of rejection. So the profession itself positions us in the very definition of what it is to be uncertain and vulnerable and have all kinds of internal weather. It positions us to know lonely endeavors, even when we love the art and endeavor. It positions us to know what it means to wonder if we're good enough and how to believe in ourselves again without external validation, without trophies or awards, the very things that kids are simultaneously struggling with day to day by virtue of even just standing on a playground or being a sibling or being in a classroom or being on their own. So the voices that come through picture books from creators come from that seed. Whether it's a slapstick book or more of an emotive picture book, it's that seed for all of us. It's that gray unknown paradox that came softly out of Thylias Moss's lips as I left her office and that university forever. And so bookmakers sit alone to essentially say, you are not alone, you are not alone. And maybe it's as much of a lullaby to ourselves as it is to children. We end up being gifts to each other, all of us living the great song. Thank you. That's what I have.
Any questions? Yes.
Obviously, in the beginning, you mentioned this great documentary, In Search of the Great Song. I just wanted to know if there's any other documentaries or different pieces of media that you feel have greatly influenced your work.
I love listening to instrumental music, especially piano music. There are certain, when I write, sometimes I even stick with one or two songs. And so that when I take a break, and the break could be a week, because I work a busy full-time job, actually in K-12 textbooks. I can't get away from books. And I need to get back into that zone. I find that music helps with that. The Luke Faulkner, Faulkner, I would love to plug his work, but his piano music I listen to all the time, and I feel like stories have kind of floated into my head because of that. Sometimes I think I'm like dancing with his music. I've even listened to Philip Glass, but it's usually instrumental, sometimes solo violin or solo piano. But no one's singing. I can't do that for some reason.
So I know you talked about how you write about the human experience and like isolation, feeling lonely and everything. And I know you talked about postpartum depression and everything after you giving birth. Before I ask my question, how old is your child now? Like,
She is actually about to go to college, so she's about to turn 18.
ooh. So this actually works perfectly with my question then. So do you feel like you will be writing about a book, like a story based on the postpartum depression growing into empty nest syndrome, per se?
Ooh.
Because that could
What if
also...
I just started crying up here? Thanks for the reminder. I do think that, well, it would be interesting to find out, because I've noticed that every book that I write is a lullaby to myself, and it's often the story I feel that I needed to hear. So the question will be, what do I need to hear at that time? Yeah, part of it, this is what I mean by the mystery. I don't know, and I love that I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to go next, but I can tell you that it is always what I need at the time. So quite possibly, because I'm already depressed thinking about her. I have 2 kids, and she's the one who talks to me. It's going to be so quiet when it's just my son.
Question. Whenever your book has been written and it's ready to go for illustration, how much control, like what part do you have in deciding who's going to illustrate the book, and what kind of communication goes on between you and the illustrator in the process of developing those books?
Oh, that's a good question. So usually when I have a manuscript ready, my agent and I will kind of talk about who we would like to see illustrate it, just based on, who would be a good fit for the kind of manuscript it is. And then usually when it gets picked up, if it gets picked up, I mean, and if, the editor will also come up with a list. And then often we compare lists and see who we agree on. So they want everybody involved to feel excited about the project, including the illustrators too. So I always know who they're going to approach, and often we do have overlaps in our list. But then there's very little interaction during the development when illustrators are actually working, and that's for their benefit because it's really two separate artists coming together. So I feel like, illustrators aren't working in service of a text. They're creating 50% of the story. And so they need to go off and be alone and think, like, what does this story mean to me? How am I going to connect with it? And I love the revelation of what they come up with. And it's a really, I don't know, it's a nice sense of community to know that you're going to collaborate. That was new for me. When I was writing for adults, I didn't have that kind of collaboration. And then, some of them who have Instagram accounts, though, will post like little sketches, and I know, like, that's from my book or our book. It's not my book, so sometimes I get little sneak peeks. And then as they're doing different book dummies and different versions, the editor and art director will share that with the writer, just so we kind of see how things are developing. And they will say to us, like, do you see anything problematic? And I've never seen anything from it. If anything, I feel like I bore them with, how effusive my compliments are. Yeah. Yes?
Along that same line, when you were doing Courage hats,
Mm-hmm.
did you picture them being paper bag hats?
I did not. That was Jessica. Yes, Jessica Bagley came up with that, and I love that she did that because I had this idea that they were going to be like these kind of ridiculous, enormous things tied under, with just a small head. But Jessica, I love that she thought this way. She wanted it to be something kids could make. So it's not like this pre-bought hat that you just happen to have where you can look like a bear or a bear can look like a person. So she came up with that, and it is funny when you have a book out where there are paper bags on a head, because you're going to be wearing a paper bag on your head for in public multiple times. So I think about that now too. Jessica and I have both, and I made one for my 12-pound dog, so he's worn one and I've had on one, and it gets pretty warm in there. I will say that. It's get pretty sweaty in there.
Kate, can you share with us what you're working on now?
So, in the dark, I don't know. I didn't have any images for it, but for those of you who like Nothing in Common, I have another one with Karina Lukin called In the Dark. And I asked them, the cover, by the way, is still under wraps. I did ask this week, and I had to do that. No worries, but we just finalized font this past week, and they're still putting together the final art. But In the Dark is a story about two groups of people who encounter each other in the dark, and about the assumptions that we make about people when we're in the dark, both literally and figuratively, and how sometimes certain groups rely on unfavorable stereotypes. But I'm going to have to keep you in the dark. I hate puns, by the way, but if you want to take sneak peeks, though, if you go to Karina Lukin's Instagram, she has some images up.
Kate, you, I don't know, I think we all in this room needed you today. And I want you to know that we are here for you. Know that we believe in you and what you create. And you are such an important part in the process, not only in the books that you create, but in the world in which we live in. And we thank you for you being you.
Thank you.